Now it's time to talk strategy as the pace of this trial rapidly intensifies. So, of course, I've got veteran prosecutor and BNC's legal contributor Paul Henderson here to do just that. All right. Paul, we knew the defense presentation would be shorter than the prosecution's, but did you think they'd wrap up this quickly?
I didn't, and I'm a little surprised at how quickly they're going and moving this along. I'm curious to know what those in limine motions were restricting both prosecution and defense just because of how fast the case is going. It really is a surprise to me, and I'm shocked that there aren't more even fake character witnesses that defense is trying to put on about how normal R. Kelly was or how nice of a guy he was to try and counter the many negative testimony evidence that we heard all of last week and the week before that's preceding their case.
And no experts, too. I'm a little surprised. Today, jurors heard from 2 more former employees of R. Kelly who, like the other witnesses yesterday, said they never witnessed him abuse anyone. One was a sound engineer who's listed on the credits for several R. Kelly songs. Was he credible?
I think he's credible as to what he may have seen and observed. And as they pointed out, what these witnesses saw and observed was not the whole story. These weren't necessarily witnesses that could have or would have observed what happened behind the closed doors, what happened at night or when he was in those rooms or in those separate houses. The interactions that R. Kelly had with them was under the work context, and that doesn't mean that every context that R. Kelly performed in or appeared in was him engaging in illegal behavior. But what this testimony is limited by is that these witnesses may not have seen information. And it's clear, and this is why prosecution brought it out, that these are witnesses that had a bias or that had a motivation to want R. Kelly to continue being successful because they had a financial investment in his success that was independent on what they knew or may have known if they were looking for it or knew or were exposed to all of his interactions and all of his operations with the girls. And so what I think is interesting about these 2 witnesses in particular is defense counsel is trying to introduce a narrative that is alternative to the story that we heard from prosecution about all of the things that would have been going on for decades. I just don't know are these 4, 5, 6 witnesses enough to counterbalance the narratives that we know from hearing the testimony from these alleged victims and these other employees that did see things that testified for prosecution. They were employees and they saw things that helped the prosecution's case. And I don't know that this small number or this speedy case that the defense is bringing in is going to be enough to counter that, unless they're relying on an alternative strategy to argue in front of the jury, independent of these employees have testified that it didn't happen. I don't know that that's going to be enough.
Well, under cross-examination, that same witness said that he had signed a confidentiality agreement at one point. Explain how that works in conjunction with him testifying during this trial.
Sure. If he signed a confidentiality agreement, now a lot of that gets raised separately because those speak to the civil limitations that take place. But if R. Kelly enforces that confidentiality or an NDA, a non-disclosure agreement against this person in some capacity, it's separate from these criminal proceedings, and he could be able to recover financially much of, if not all of, the money that was paid to these people. And so that's got to be a consideration for folks that are testifying. And we know from the testimony, both from prosecution and defense, that R. Kelly was very focused on having folks sign these letters that we've heard so much about that deflected, if not obstructed, him being found guilty of committing crimes and or bad behavior. So none of this is a surprise. Quite frankly, Yodit, the surprise to me is that we haven't seen these letters. The other thing that's in that same category that we've heard a lot about, especially from from prosecution, are these videotapes on iPads. Now, we haven't seen any of these videotapes. We haven't seen any of these letters. To me, it raises the issue of what's been restricted from the in limine motions And it raises the issue of whether or not either of the sides is in possession of those videotapes or of those letters, because we haven't seen them so far in this case. And I would imagine that that would be very persuasive, independently of the testimony that we've had that we have to evaluate now. I'd imagine that this jury, I wouldn't be surprised if the jury came back with a question asking about, where are those letters? Can we see them? Where are those videotapes? Do they exist? And not having those questions answered because of how the judge has ruled in the case.
Now, legally, the defense don't have to put on a shred of evidence. We know that. But some would argue that they didn't have a choice. Would they have been better off, the defense that is, not calling any witnesses and arguing that the prosecution simply didn't meet their burden, so there was no need?
I don't think so, because I think juries would be influenced by the long line of victims that they heard and the long line of witnesses that they heard. And remember, these are both men and women, and 6 of them were underage at the time that they were alleging illegal behavior, sexual behavior, where they got STDs, where they were treated badly, where they were treated horribly and had to follow ridiculous rules. I mean, that's a lot for a jury to take in and to dismiss based on legal criteria that they may or may not understand at that stage of the case. What I'm surprised about is that the defense counsel is not putting on experts to talk about the brand of celebrity that I think might help their case about this is how celebrities act. And it's not been illegal. It's not illegal for other celebrities to act in the way that R. Kelly has acted. And people are promiscuous around him because they're groupies and they're fans. And these are just behaviors that people engage in. They're promiscuous and they are liars and they take things from him. That's the kind of expert testimony that I wanted to hear from defense, or that I expected in a case like this, especially if they're not putting on a lot of witnesses. And so it's surprising to me that they're wrapping up their case so quickly, but I still don't think that there is a place left for them to argue other than either the brand of celebrity and or the judgment against groupies and fans that are around R. Kelly. I just don't know if that's going to be enough to overcome the hurdle of judgment associated with inappropriate sexual statutory rape and against the litany of testimony that we heard from the past few weeks from people talking about how terrible he behaved as it relates to the criminal charges that he's facing for racketeering.
Well, what do you think both the prosecution and the defense will narrow their focus on in closing arguments? I mean, that is coming up in a few days.
Yeah, I don't think they have much of a choice. I think prosecution is really going to focus on the litany of options that the jury has to choose from of illegal behavior that they will argue R. Kelly directed and orchestrated. And I think on the counter to that, the defense counsel is really going to focus on what I just talked about, was his brand of celebrity. He didn't know that he was committing an illegal act because he's a celebrity. And if he did commit an illegal act, it was with willing participants. Again, it's going to be on the prosecution to point out to the jury that even if that were true, and even if they were permissive, there are acts that took place that were illegal statutorily that you cannot give consent to. That's the statutory rape. And so I'd expect that to be a learning lesson from the jury, from both defense counsel and from prosecution when it comes time for closing argument. And that's what I'm looking for. That's what I'm waiting to hear.
All right, veteran prosecutor and legal contributor Paul Henderson.